Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today. We are excited to have you here as part of our PathLock Innovation Series. Today is our Oracle Day, our Oracle Innovation Day, and I'm going to be putting a link in the chat shortly with the schedule of events for the rest of the day. So if there are any sessions that you would like to join for the rest of the day, you can click on that link and it will take you to the session descriptions and you can register there. With that, our session right now is the future of ERP controls, how automation and AI can enable ERP security. Our presenters today are Mike Ward and Preston Leftwich from PathLock, and they will introduce themselves in just a moment. But first, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. My name is Stephanie Anderson. I'm the Global Webinar Manager here at PathLock. To prevent background noise today, everyone is on mute. But if you have any questions, go ahead and add them into the questions box on the control panel, and we will answer those throughout the presentation at the end of the event. With that, I'll turn the time over to our presenters to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think we're being recorded as well, are we? So people can pick up the recording later, which is good, but thank you for that. Welcome, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And what we're going to talk about today is, yes, futures. But I think the thing I want to stress is that almost everything I'm going to talk about today is in existence today, but not necessarily in use on your system. What we're really trying to work with you on is how you satisfy your auditors, but perhaps also at the same time how you satisfy concerns that your board level, C-level people have with regard to hacking into your system, with regard to losing data, with regard to potential for audit to qualify your accounts, etc. How you control your Oracle ERP system is extremely crucial, and that's what we're going to talk about today, and particularly how automation and new technologies can actually enable you to get a much better result. So let's get on with it. My name is Mike Ward. As you can see from the picture, I'm very, very old. I first implemented an accounting system over 45 years ago. So yes, in those days we didn't call them ERP. That's the way the IT world is, isn't it? We invent a phrase to a three-letter abbreviation to confuse everybody. But yes, I've had a lot of experience of implementing ERP systems, managing ERP systems, and selling ERP systems. And now my job at PathLock is that I'm responsible for GRC right across the world. So I'd like to talk to you about these issues going forward. But Preston, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mike. Well, I have been around a while, just not as long as Mr. Ward. I've been doing this for about 22, 23 years. Started working in some of the older versions of ERP and as a functional configuration consultant analyst, if you will, in specifically working on security and role design for organizations implementing larger ERP. For the last 3.5, 4 years, I've worked with Mike, helping clients design and come up with solution strategies on how to make sure that the design of their systems meets the SOD requirements and the other GRCs that are out there. So I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of you, hopefully, and for those of you who haven't met, I look forward to meeting you someday. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much, Preston. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I think my objective really is to ensure that the starting point is understanding, and that you understand what the risks are on your system, on your Oracle ERP system, and particularly the role that controls play in reducing that risk. Now, perhaps some of you, if you are from the audit side, will skip over that bit, but from the IC side, I think it's an area where people just don't understand it in enough detail. And really, you do need to understand it if you're going to manage it. If you're going to control risk, you need to be able to understand what the risks are. But the main thing I'm going to focus on is how to identify those risks in your system, what you are liable for, what is likely to happen on your system, and how automation can help you with reducing those risks, solving those problems, and I'm going to touch on how you then go to satisfy the business. But let's move on from there. All right. So there's the contents. Let's get on with it. All right. My starting point today is talking about risk, all right? And I don't think IT people necessarily are very good at it. All right? I think I'm an IT person. I find it much easier to talk about how the ERP system is delivering functionality to the end users, etc. But we really need to understand what risks that we can have on our system, and it comes down to these kind of areas, all right? And I think if we start in the left-hand corner, we can see that all of you will have security audits going on. All right, it might be an IT security audit, or it might be something that is more in-depth, like a SOX audit, etc. All right, and any of these now, whether you're a business that needs to be compliant with SOX or any other mid-market and above company, you'll find the auditors are coming and asking very similar questions. If they haven't asked those questions of you yet, they're going to ask those questions in the future. And the point is that they are asking these questions for a reason. They want to dig into the risk. They want you to help them understand whether there are any risks. So the point, I think, is clear that you've got to try and get ahead of that game and understand and assess your risks. The biggest risk area on most of the systems are around segregation of duties. You'll be aware that segregation of duties is the way that you ensure that people don't have too much access to a process. You'll be aware, I hope, that the most common fraud on your system is what I call the dummy company fraud, i.e. setting up your brother-in-law as a supplier and receiving his invoices and paying him. And not a real supplier, shouldn't have paid him. But as I always say to people, if you want to have a go at it, if you've got that kind of access at that whole of that end-to-end process, keep the numbers down low, don't get greedy, and probably 90% of you listening on this call will have a number of people in your organization who can commit that fraud. The bottom line is you should not have anybody that can actually commit that end-to-end process. What you need to do is segregate the parts of the process, so that 3 or 4 people need to act in concert to be able to commit it, which never would happen. But it is astounding to me that people allow these things to happen. And one of the main reasons is that the auditors don't ask the right questions, and it's a hassle to implement SOD, certainly on the on-prem systems like EBS and JD Edwards and PeopleSoft. There aren't any integrated SOD controls. So you have to use a third-party tool, or you have to put in a spreadsheet, which bluntly speaking doesn't work. So you need to look at this issue, you need to understand it. So we're going to spend some time on that. Then we get to user provisioning, and this is of particular relevance here that your auditor is going to be asking you to review your user provisioning procedures, but it's in that provisioning and deprovisioning levers, joiners, levers, movers, that you need to think very carefully about the processes and the controls. Are you checking segregation of duties as you give a new role to a user, a new responsibility to a user? You need to be able to do that, or else your security is going to get worse over a period of time. So the complexity around this really is getting worse and worse. There is going to be more compliance, whether you like it or not. I think most people are aware that data privacy is going to become a more and more significant issue everywhere in the world. In North America, most people are ignoring the fact that the California Act is now in place, but there are, I think last time I looked, there are 21 states of the 50. Yes, those in Europe, there are 50 states. There are 21 that are enacting some form of data privacy legislation. You need to be aware of it, and you need to be able to comply with it. But the overall issue for all of this is that it's time consuming to implement these controls. It's difficult to get the reporting out. It takes time and cost, and therefore people do the minimum. And that's where the risk comes from. That's where the risk increases. What we know is that internal control weaknesses are responsible for really half of these issues. And I do know from personal experience that most people in IT don't like the word internal control, but what I preach to you very heavily is that internal controls are the solution to these problems. You put in place a process for your user provisioning, document it properly, put in place workflow that takes labor, people out of the process, let it automate the process as much as is possible, and then you have a good internal control. And the same for segregation of duties, etc. We're going to talk about that in a moment. All right. But overall, the core issue is that most people think that it's never going to happen to them. That fraud is not going to happen on your watch. Well, I hate to tell you, but you got a 1 in 2 chance that somebody is going to commit fraud on one of your internal systems. This isn't necessarily a hacker from Eastern Europe. This is mainly committed, or at least 50% of them are committed by insiders. Employees are your biggest threat in this area. Consultants, contractors, anybody you give access to the system. And what you've done is you've given too much access, but do you know where the risk is? And of course, what we're all doing, we're told we have to move to the cloud because this is the only solution to the world's problems. This isn't one of my presentations where I rant about thinking carefully about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But you'll find a number of those ranting presentations on the website. But whether we like it or not, we are going and pushing our applications to the cloud. There are some very good benefits to that, but what we're creating is more risk. We're creating more complex environments that we don't necessarily understand very well, particularly because what we're putting in place there are things that we don't necessarily have the skills to fully understand. We're relying on new skill sets, new third parties mainly. Most of you, as you go in your journey to the cloud, will be using a third-party integrator, systems integrator, work with you, to help you to understand and maybe even manage the problems with the security in the cloud. And as I talk to CIOs, that is the biggest thing they worry about. Are we creating problems for ourselves with this security risk? And then the final element of this is cost. We are all under pressure, and bluntly speaking, in the current economy, there is very few IT departments who are going to get increased costs. Increased budgets. So that pressure on our costs, the freeze on headcounts, the inability to get hold of the people increases risk. All of it increases risk. And what is the answer to that? Well, the answer is we've got to find time savings in our processes. We have to implement security controls, internal controls, which take labor out of it. We need to create a dashboard which has a button on it that says produce audit reports, and there it is. We hit the button and the audit reports come out. We've got to create efficiencies, and really that is what this session is about. But issue number one is I use a well-worn and very old story about understanding how to actually get on our path, on our journey. And the story is a tourist in Trafalgar Square in London walking up to a policeman. You can visualize him. He's got that hat on. He's got that uniform. And he walks up to the policeman and says, well, can you tell me how I get to Edinburgh? And the policeman says, well, I wouldn't start from here, sir. The point is that you need to know where you are to be able to start your journey. All right? And the only way you're going to understand where you are with your ERP security, with your internal controls, is to start with an audit. All right? So the issues really come down to the fact that you want to satisfy your lords and masters. You want to understand where your audit issues are. You want to understand where your risks are. For instance, what I say to people is, if you do not know how many people in your organization can commit the dummy company fraud, you're at risk. Your job's at risk, because it's a very common fraud. And if you're responsible for security on your system and somebody commits that fraud, I wonder whose job is going to go. You need to understand and point out to management where the issues are. And the only way you can do that is to to produce a plan, to understand where your risks are, to understand how the security is set up, and maybe start planning how to put in internal controls and remediating the issues. So, Preston, why don't you have a go? Are you there?
Yep, I'm here. I'm still listening to your Trafalgar Square joke. I love that one. So let's talk about why you even come to anyone to talk about why you want to do an assessment. Someone who wants to put that stake in the ground and say, all right, we're going to start here, and this is how long it's going to take us to get there. One is because you want to do a redesign. You know that there's a redesign out there in looming. Your system's been around for 20 years. You inherited it from 3 other groups of people that built it based on an older technology. It's been upgraded a dozen times. You know you're due. That's one of the reasons, and it's probably the most common reason of why people want assessment. They want to know how much effort's involved. Another one is because there's a chance to define in security assessments, a chance to define situations whereby we can change the way we do our business. And that business change allows us to eliminate some of the processing that causes conflict and risk. And the other side of it is that you know what's going on and you have a good understanding of what's going on, but you're just not sure of how you're going to implement those controls, what's available, how you want to manage to it, what the timeline looks like, or the scope of the engagement. All of those questions we're answering in an assessment to say, here's exactly the time that we think, based on the last 30 years of work that we've done. Here's what it takes to make any of these types of changes. Here's the guideline, the path. Here's the GPS coordinates on how to get where you're going, and ultimately provide you the solution that goes with that. So if we look kind of at the next part, we're going to go over sort of what you get with that assessment. And first is the actual starting of the process, where we actually bring in a utility, pull the data that's agnostic on your system, as far as it's anonymized, and it's literally looking at just the configuration of how your security and so forth is set up. We look over that data, we review it with the human view. So we take our AI logic, run over top of the data, get the results out of it, and then we do the interpretive analysis. We dig deep dive into the data, and we look at how the configurations work together and where there are possibly explanations or exceptions to the rule in that system. And then we bring the results back to the group. We talk through them. We look at the highlight, the data sets itself, and then we provide the detail level package back to you, formatted with high risks, medium, and low risks kind of identified, path to solution, some remediation planning, and help you provide the project definition that you would need to kind of kick that process off. We let you review it, and then we'll come back and provide you any support or question and answers after that time is over. So if you have anything that you want to further talk about, or any further reviewing of the data, we'll give you that support on the back end as well. And so if we start looking at the detail of what you get out of that design, what you get on one side is the actual security model and the user configurations that go into security, and we kind of rate you on how well you're doing. So generally we're talking about how many records do you have, how many records of security per user, who's got super user access, do you have people who are set up with the same identifying marks that make them where they have 3 sign-ons to the system, are the people that have been removed from the system, have they been removed properly and they're not able to get back in the system. So all of that sort of goes into the actual design and the structure of the actual security, not specifically to who has access to what, but to the idea of, is the architecture behind your security efficient and effective in the way it's designed. And then next we'll move over to the other pieces that we'll go through, and we'll look at the next slide, which will give us the review of what is considered critical access in your system. And this is not so much about SOD. This is what I like to call a catalog of people who have single-threaded access in your system to make impactful changes to the way transactions hit your system, because that's the nature of their job. It's not that we're trying to say it's a risk. We're trying to say the people that can right transactions that affect your financial stability in a company, those people should be on a list, right? Something that you can refer to if something goes wrong, a short list of people to call in and retrain, review, and work with in the event that something goes wrong in a particular form or function. Knowing those people gives you the ability also to track their movement through the company. When those roles change and they've moved from, we just had someone the other day talk about it, from treasury into the accounting department, out of the financial dollars and cents and into more of a specific version of the accounting department, that role never changed. And when that doesn't change, you still, now that person who's in a different place has access to make changes that they shouldn't. So those are what we're going to grab here on the critical access side. And when we move into the SOD side, we're actually going to talk about where I like to call it an end-to-end transactional availability that gives them the ability to be invisible, if you will. And that is, you can take a transaction from inception to completion, and you can basically do it all yourself. And if that's the case, then you have the option to do what Mike likes to refer to as that dummy corp idea. You can create the company, you can tie that bank account to your offshore account, you can create the voucher, submit it for payment underneath the radar, and it gets out and run. And by the time anyone realizes it's done, you've left the country. Those are the kinds of things we're talking about here with segregation of duties. There's lots of different kinds of them. There's hundreds of thousands of different ways to combine them. And what we're looking at is sort of the top level here right off the bat. We have opportunity to create additional reviews and additional details if you know your SOD lists very well. But the goal here is to come up with these agnostic business users that can have access to the system. And we also give you the IT user side too, the IT grouping of access that can create records in the system. And there's that trend last couple of years that's been going on where everybody says, hey, IT is supposed to have everything. And it's like, well, everything to see, but not necessarily to transact. And so segregating the IT people out and making sure they can do their job to support, but can't actually do transaction because that's not their job. That's the way we're going, and that seems to be the way we're headed. So after all of that's done, what we'll actually do is we'll work on the data in the system to give you some more detail. So if Mike, if you'll move on to the next one for me, we'll get into the demo. So let's get into showing my screen. And Mike, can you see everything okay?
I can.
Okay, great. So inside of the actual demo, what we're looking for here is we're bringing that data into sort of a dashboard. And we're going to come back to the details in a minute, and I won't spend too much time on it, but I will give it to you in detail if you ever would like to talk through it. Let Mike know and we'll go through a detail. But we'll go to general security roles and reviews with the system. We'll talk about average number of roles, average number of users, that kind of thing. We'll talk about the types of security records that are in the system, and then we'll get into the actual breakdown of what I just was going over on that slide presentation. And that is, we'll get into critical data. We'll get into the critical access in the system, and the way that works in the system is it's really designed, and what happens when you wait for more than 30 minutes, right? It logs you back out. What happens with this is, while we're giving you the security data and sort of the metrics, the KPIs, if you will, there's that three-letter abbreviation we talk about. What we're doing here is we're providing the detail of what we're going to give you back in the system. We're providing that detail back inside of the dashboard. And this data will come to you in a CSV format. It'll be formatted. It'll have lots of information behind it, but it'll also be in a portal for you to come and grab and review on your own. So what happens is that critical master data, that cataloging process, will give you access to those people that are in that group. All of the users that have access to those critical applications within your system, agnostic to whether it's JD Edwards or Oracle or any of those systems, we're looking at who has access to do the major functions in the system, and here's that catalog. And all of that data is then exportable in a report form so that you can bring it down and work with it. And we pivot the data by rule, meaning who's got access to a particular function, or if you want to look at the IT user groups, for example, and you know your users already who might have elevated access in your system, you'll have the list of access here, and within each user, you'll then have all of the actual applications they have critically accessed in the last 12 months. These are all of the groupings that you have in the system. So now we're looking at two different ways of looking at the data. Both sets of data are extractable in a reporting that gives you all of this data in detail. And then on the SOD side of things, what we do is we take that whole transactional detail and we do the same exact thing. We talk about a rule first. You can look at the rule that's out there about whether someone can create a vendor and create a payment in the system. And once that vendor payment is created in the system, do they have the ability to actually create the payment and run that voucher through the system? So same idea, here's the rule, here are the users that are in the rule, and you can actually drill down deeper into it and find out which role grants the access to the actual rule, where you have the data stored, and where you need to go after specifically in the system to make changes to eliminate this kind of breach of process. And then on the other side, we'll flip it the other way. Now you go right back after the users, and you can utilize the user grouping to go after those elevated users and see who has access by process, not just critical functionality, but by process. And you can actually see in this grouping the same idea. This is the one user that has access to break all of these different rules, and under each rule then the details that go along with that, and then the role that creates that violation for you. What this helps you do is it gives you the microscope. It drives you to the detail to be able to make the change to the role, to take the programming out of the role at a detailed level so that you know exactly what you remove from a role gives you that consistency back in your role again. You have clarity over which programs are affected, and you can see very quickly that all of these programs are in one side of the equation and only these 4 on the other. Now you know if you get rid of these 4, you're back to square one and everybody's good again. So the idea behind our processing in the assessment piece is to give you that workflow, that path on what you need to address quickly, where you'll get the biggest bang for your buck as far as cleaning up your SOD. And then we give you the dashboard to continue that, where our goal is to train you on how to look at the data, work the data, and then help you get that process started and on your way to keeping it consistent time and time again, and so that you can leave the system for the next person in good shape. Mike, back to you.
Thank you, Preston. Good stuff. If you've got any questions, folks, as we said, key them into the questions box and we'll pick those up as we're going along or at the end. But what I want to talk about now is efficiency and control. So what Preston has shown you is how we help you understand where your starting point is, your Trafalgar Square, but you know where you are, all right? How do you then actually put in controls, and what are those controls, all right? I think the first point to start off with is that you've got to understand that this is majorly about application security, all right? You have other issues around boundary point security, malware, etc., but it's application security we're focusing on today, all right? And sat in the key element of application security is with regard to how you set up your roles, your privileges, all right? And the biggest risk, and I know some of you will be, for instance, on Oracle ERP Cloud, that the supplier might well have given you a set of standard roles, all right? I can tell you from personal experience that is very dangerous. Those roles are not necessarily fit for purpose. So look very closely at them. We can run an assessment over them as Preston has gone through. The core of it is that your roles need to apply to the principle of least privilege. So there are a lot of new phrases for this these days, but I think it's a very good way of explaining it, all right? That the role that is given to a user needs to actually be giving access to the items that employee needs to do their job and nothing else, all right? And if only read-only access rather than update access is needed to do the job, that is what you should give, all right? So that is the underlying principle, all right, to that control of how you give access. After the roles, you can move on to your risk model, your SOD model, all right? You can get that these days. You can go on Google and type in SOD model for EBS, and you'll find lots of them there, all right? Is that the best way of doing it? Probably not, but it is a way of doing it. The prime thing, wherever you get it from, we have a number of models, fairly obviously, is that you've got to tailor it to your business. You've got to actually sit with each line and look at who is responsible. You take that first one, payroll issues, particularly critical, but there is somebody in the business that is responsible. We in IT are not there to take responsibility for that risk. We are there to provide the tools to help the payroll manager understand those risks and mitigate them, all right, so that the problem doesn't occur. All right, so you've got to implement this as your model, put the time into understanding it, etc. Audit reporting. Time and again, people say to me, well, what are the audit reports that are required for SOX? And if you look at the schedule, there is no definition of that. All right, it's what the auditor thinks is right. And I'll give you a clue. What they asked for last year, they'll ask for different things this year. So they're trying to keep you on your toes, quite rightly. They will always look at the violation details. All right, who is in violation of our SOD rules? All right? They should also always look at the mitigations. All right? What is mitigated? All right? But they will ask different questions. And the point of this is, yes, if you've got those 5, that's probably a 50-60 percentile, but you need a report writer that will enable you to answer the questions that they've never asked before. All right? You need to be able to have a menu saying, here you go, I'll get that for you. We've got a list on our menu. I think it's got 43 reports on it at the moment, but there's also a report writer behind that. Then we move into the next area of control, which is user certification. All right, it's called different things by different people: access reviews, periodic reviews. All of you on this phone, on this call, and this webinar, will be up for this. If you're not doing it today, believe me, in the next year or so, you will be doing it. All right, this is the process whereby you get the business to sign off access. All right. And it's a painful process, all right? But it is a very important control activity. This is the activity whereby which at least once a year and hopefully once a quarter, you actually get the end user management to verify that the access is correct, all right? And your auditors will be pushing on it, all right? It's particularly relevant, obviously, for financial systems because that's where the major areas of fraud are likely to be. But the core with it really is to enable the management to be able to understand it. The worst case I've ever seen is a 65-page PDF that somebody produced with a SQL script, got it out, and passed over to the financial controller, stapled it together and said, there you go, just initial the bottom right-hand corner of that, will you, every page? And the poor controller did not understand a single line. We've got to help them understand it. It's got to be in a language they get. They've got to be able to ask questions. This is very time consuming, all right? But it's an essential control, and therefore the auditors will force you to do it. So the point here is that I come to this quite often first when I'm talking to user management, that because it's an area whereby you can actually get benefits very rapidly. It's a good way of starting off automating your controls, because you will almost certainly get a return on investment for automating this control, which is less than a year, certainly less than 2 years. So it's a good one to get in the bank and understand and benefit the business from. The user leaver thing is a more complex one. All right, it's, here is an example, all right, but it's actually a fairly simple example. All right? What we find is that everybody's process is slightly different. All right? The key to it is obviously giving self-service, all right, that somebody can access a request. But the other side of the coin is that the auditors will insist that you're approving these changes. All right. So who in the business for this type of user, for this role, is going to approve it? So, and you need multiple approvers. All right. If you've got a multinational business, you'll need multiple approvers in multiple countries. So the workflow involved in making this work, particularly interfacing to other systems, perhaps taking some kind of feed from your identity source, whether it's AD, Active Directory, actually using Azure AD, we've got interfaces to that now. or perhaps you're using ServiceNow to trigger the request. You've got to be able to put in place workflow. You've got to enable the approver to have the means to automatically check the SOD, as I said earlier. This process can be complex, but we can put in workflow now to automate the whole of this process, apart from the one thing, which is the user, the approver approving the actual process. Good thing to automate, good control. And then you can look at continuous controls monitoring, a huge area. It's not where you would normally start, all right? But it's here in particular that there are tools now available, to enable you to clean the process. All right, wouldn't it be a good idea that in plot 3 there, item 3, that we track what users are actually doing, right? And if we took a long enough period, say 12 months, this is what they've done, and then compared that to what the role structure says they've got access to, all right, then you've got you're in a situation whereby if you compare those two items of data, large that they will be, you can do this automatically with AI tools to see whether you can improve the role. And we've now got tools in the marketplace which will enable you to improve the access. All right, the system will recommend changes, all right, that mean that you can actually update your role structure. But then you get into a key area which I think has been neglected, and this is probably the biggest area of change going forward, which is that you've not just got one system, you've got multiple systems. You might well be using, on this call, probably you're using EBS or JD Edwards or ERP Cloud for your accounting application. Number one, that's your single source of overall truth, the financial position of the business. But perhaps you've bought Ariba for your purchasing environment. Perhaps you've bought ServiceNow for your help desk. You've brought in Salesforce for your customer management, etc. All right. You will have dozens. All right. We have a client in Europe who has claimed to have 265 different systems. How on earth they managed to get themselves into that situation, I'm not sure, but the other things that are effective for you is acquisitions. All right? You buy a company, they've got Microsoft Dynamics. Are you going to move them onto ERP Cloud? Maybe eventually, but in the meantime, you've got to have controls. And the key controls you need are the same controls we've been talking about. All right? User certification. Wouldn't it be a good idea to have one means of certifying the users across all these applications? Segregation of duties. This is an area I know a lot of people are now worrying about. If you've bought a separate purchasing environment, that dummy company fraud that I was talking about now passes over both your EBS system for your accounting to your Ariba purchasing environment. How do you check SOD across those two applications? But now, finally, in the last few months, last year, you can look at segregation of duties across these applications. All right, it's about preventing fraud, obviously, but it's also about efficiency. All right, to have one interface for new users to give them access to multiple systems, multiple applications. All right, that's the way forward. All right. A couple of other things I'll throw in here. We've got to look very closely at sensitive access. All right, and this is not just payroll data; it's all parts of your data. And what we can now do with some of the automation tools that are coming out is looking at profiling user behavior. All right, looking at what users are doing by doing long-term tracking of their activity, and therefore looking to see whether there is anomalies in the data, or anomalies in their behavior. All right? And this is a new area, I think, for all of us, but certainly in 2023, this threat detection angle, I think, will become very important to a lot of users, particularly those that feel that they are sensitive to fraud and data loss. This is an area of implicit data protection, is an area which is not so relevant to all of you, but I'll throw it in there. I hope that most of you have understood role-based access control is the way forward. I know on EBS the majority of users use privileges rather than roles, and you could debate whether there's a difference between those two issues, but which I don't want to get into today. But as you go into the cloud-based systems like ERP Cloud, it is role-based access control, RBAC, and that's a good thing. That gives you better control over the roles, right? But that's not enough for some people. Some people need to have a look at their data protection in a more rarefied manner, right? And in particular, the thing that we see some people, it's probably only 20% of the market, is dynamic protection, all right? Attribute-based access control, all right? So the attributes could be users, locations, etc. The one I always quote is perhaps you, particularly with people working from home, that if they're not on their home IP, they've gone down to Starbucks to get a coffee and do a bit of work there, that you actually reduce the amount of data they can see. So the policy in that case is based on them where they are and what their IP address they're actually accessing the data from. And then you can actually blank out data. So perhaps in that case, you blank out all the more sensitive data. But you can do it by time of day. You can do it by many different attributes. And people are finding this very useful, particularly in high-risk environment, defense, drugs companies, etc., where that kind of dynamic protection is required. And that, that's now available. That's been available for the last 2-3 years, and I think more people are taking it up. But it's not for everybody. It's not a freebie. It's not a 5 minute implementation, and it isn't a replacement for getting your role structure right. Moving on, then the process workflow. All right, and I put this in here in these presentations for a reason. All right, and that is that we've talked about the major internal controls, around SOD, around user certification, etc. But then every business has thousands of processes, and wouldn't it be a good idea to put controls in around those? This is not necessarily something that the auditor is interested in, but it's the natural extension. And by using a workflow tool to do this, not only are you automating things and therefore taking cost out of the business, you're ensuring that policy is followed, that process is followed, and documenting it. One of the things that people forget is what this means is that your auditors, internal and external, when they come and look at these processes, can actually look at the audit trail. One of the things that auditors are now tending to do, for instance, on user new users processes, is they'll come in and say, right, not only do I need to see the documentation of the process, but I want to see who and how you're doing it. Give me a list of all users that you put onto the system on May the 5th, 2022, and who authorized them. It's a painful thing if you're doing it manually or even partially manually, but if you're using workflow to do it and it's fully documenting, you've got a full audit trail. You can just go to it and it'll take you 5 minutes to answer that question. So more and more of this will lead out of the main controls processes into other processes in the business. But as you do more and more of this, the thing that people are complaining about is that they want a picture of what's going on. Senior management need to know, where we've got to in our authorizations, to be able to control the controls, to know what's going on. And more particularly the other side of it, to get early warning of risks building up. Wouldn't it be a good idea to get a Monday morning picture for your CIO of whether your SOD risks have increased this week over last week? So now what we're seeing rolling out is a set of tools to enable you to put a good control front end, that will give the management the means to have a picture of what's happening on the system. But the final thing that I think is probably the most futuristic of them all is the role improvement. I did mention it earlier on, but certainly through 2023, we see a number of tools rolling out now. We've got a couple of tools to enable you not. What I've always said in role management is that by definition, your role structure gets worse and worse. All right, it's called security creep. Because somebody comes in and says, right, okay, well, that's great, but can I have access to this, please, as well? You know, can you just modify my role? So over a period of time, it gets gradually worse. All right, and if you did your last role project 5, 6, 7 years ago, your role structure is going to be not good. All right, but what we need now is the controls over how the security changes, and that's where the controls I've just talked about come in. But wouldn't it be a good idea to have a tool that looks at how we can improve the roles going forward using automation? All right, and certainly through 2023, we'll be rolling out these tools which enable you not just to stay clean, but to improve the quality of your role structure. So just moving, I'm going to do this very rapidly in 5 minutes, but those are the issues that really we see moving into automating your controls. As I said, it's about efficiency, all right, reducing the cost of the business, and that makes the CFO very happy, all right, and it's about reducing the workload in the IT department, automating as much as it is physically possible. Thirdly, satisfying the auditor because you're giving them the information you need, and if you're brave enough, giving them the interface to be able to use the tools themselves. But how do you actually kick this off? All right. Well, issue number one is to be able to work with the business, right, and to be able to see exactly how to build a business case. And I'm not going to go through this in a great deal of detail because we've just got 5 minutes left. All right. Stephanie is harassing me, so Stephanie, yes, I'll finish in the next 5 minutes. But so it's about understanding your risk, and we've gone through that. The point is that you've got to then present that to management, and if you put that in front of the CFO and say, here you are, here are our risks, these are the number of people that can commit the dummy company fraud, all right, away you go. Yeah, he has to do something about it, right? But you've got to then identify the stakeholders and build the business case. And the thing I wanted to stress is that there are savings, all right? We can help you build the business case because there are savings around the access reviews, there are savings around the reporting. In most cases, not all, there are savings around the security management and user provisioning, all right? So we can help you build those numbers and build that business case, all right? For some people, the soft savings, you're not going to have a fraud, and the average fraud is $180,000, you know, that can go into the case as well. But let's summarize it all before Stephanie gives me grief for talking too much. All right. So what I've hoped you perhaps to understand is one issue. It's called efficiency. It's called automation. It's called building in tools that will enable you to reduce the number of people involved in these controls. All right. It's around SOD and audit. It's around provisioning. It's around the way you manage your security, and particularly the management of that access, etc. And it's about making these things much, much more efficient. All right. I always like to end these things with some tips and tricks. So let's give it a quick go. All right. Number one, evaluate the risks. You don't know how to get to Edinburgh if you don't know where you are. All right. You've got to know what your risks are. You've got to be able to enunciate to the CFO. All right. I want to do this project because these are our current problems. All right. And you do that by auditing live security, not dummy security, but what your actual security is. But you do have to know the business processes. You need to involve people. You know, the only way you get on top of understanding the risks in purchasing is to understand how that process that I described, the dummy company fraud, can be committed. You got to plan your roles. All right? Underlying all of this, you've got to have a belief in how you build your roles and what process you're going to build and what principle you're going to use. I think least privilege is the best way of describing it. Then you got to move on to your controls. Understand what you've got. All right. Look at your risk matrix in particular. All right. Some people think that SOD and the risk matrix is all the controls you need. It is the most fundamental, but it's not the only one. But build it out. But through all of these controls, including the risk SOD matrices, you've got to empower the business. It's their ERP system. These are their risks, their controls. All right. So build them into your processes and explain and give them the tools to do it. But all of this, folks, is about automation, automation, automation. All right. It's putting in place sustainable controls, all right, today, which will save you money, all right. And I guarantee you, over a 3-year return on investment, these kind of controls will save you money. All right, it might cost you more in the first year, but it'll save you money. And what you're doing is ensuring the process is followed. All right, taking people out of the loop. All right, this is boring work. You want to take people out of it. All right, so that is all we've got today. I don't know whether have we got any questions, Stephanie, because we've got 1.5 minutes.
Yeah, we have a few questions. Again, if you have any questions, please add them now into the question box. How much does an assessment cost?
Oh, blimey. There you go. That's a blunt question. Generally speaking, we run these assessments for around, it depends on the size of the business, etc., size of the issues, but they're around about $10,000. If you go to Deloitte and ask them to do it, they'll charge you $50,000. So that's a pretty good return on investment, I think.
Okay, and will the auditor accept the output from the tool?
Yes, well, it's a very good question. The answer to auditors is you never actually know. All right, the point to producing documentation for the auditors is listen to what they're saying, all right, and produce it for them. All right, in your first around this loop, the answer is that they will accept what you've got. All right, it's the second year you're going to run into trouble. Will they accept it as accurate? Yes, they have to, because I'll give you a clue that in certain of the systems, what you're getting here out of the tools are far greater accuracy than they have out of their own tools, right? Most of the time, of course, what they're doing is asking you to dump data out to a spreadsheet and then they play with it, all right? And what they're using is certainly not as good. But the key is not so much what they will accept. They will accept the data, but they're going to ask different questions. So you've got to be ready for the different questions.
Okay, great. I think that's all the time we have for questions. Again, if you have any questions, you can email Mike at mike.ward@pathlock.com, or you can email us at events@pathlock.com. Just one quick announcement. If you book a demo with us, we're doing a promo that if you book a demo with us by the 31st of December, you'll receive a Starbucks gift card. So you just email events@pathlock.com to get scheduled and receive that gift card. And with that, I just wanted to say thanks so much for coming, and we hope to see you at future events.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, folks. All the best.